What's up, Internet? It's your boy, the Notorious B.I.V. And I'm back with another frigging movie review. I'm seeing a lot of movies lately. What can I say? Uh, tis the season to watch movies. And yeah, I got my Spider-Man Far From Home poster here. Sweet. So, so yeah, I saw The King's Man, and this is a little late. I wanted to see it Friday. I saw it yesterday instead. You know, life happens. But anyway, um, so I think I haven't been like a huge fan of the Kingsman series. So they did the Kingsman, and then they did like the Kingsman 2, I guess, or something like that. I've only seen the first Kingsman movie, and I thought it was great. I enjoyed it. Um, it's a great it's a great sort of twist on James Bond. It's kind of making fun of James Bond, but um, paying homage to James Bond at the same time. And it's kind of a nice update of James Bond. James Bond is like, to me, it's so stale and has been for years now. And I just like so Kingsman was cool and fresh and fun. James Bond is it's kind of a product of its time. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, it was like, it fits in the 60s and 70s there with the whole like Playboy lifestyle kind of thing, um, actually a friend in elementary school whose dad lived the whole Playboy lifestyle, and it was really weird. And it didn't end well, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, like, I think all these guys, Playboy was like the big thing back in the day, and all these guys wanted to live that lifestyle, and James Bond like kind of exemplified that whole Playboy lifestyle, right? He's like he's a confirmed bachelor, and he's smooth and suave and gets all the chicks all the time and blah blah blah, all that stuff. He's rich, and you know goes places and gambles and does all that stuff. The Playboy lifestyle, like dude comes home and has his pipe and his slippers, and you know his beautiful wife comes out in her cocktail dress and attends to his needs and whatever. It's that kind of weird thing. Anyway, that existed in the 60s and 70s, and like these days, I think most of us are kind of like, that was weird, but whatever. Um, so I'm rambling, but James Bond is like, just, it belongs in that era, and they've never really been able to update it very well, in my opinion. So I enjoyed the first Kingsman movie. I haven't seen the second one, just because I just never got around to it. And if you like the Kingsman series, this is like a prequel. The King's Man is like the prequel to the Kingsman, I guess. And I don't generally like prequels necessarily. Like some prequels are okay, but other prequels just don't need to be made, right? They just don't, like, like the Star Wars prequels, for example, right? Darth Vader was just like this cool, this like scary, cool, badass villain, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, like this guy's a total bad A, and like, you don't really need to know any more than that, right? You just need to know, like, yeah, he's he's gonna mess you up, so stay out of his way. You know what I mean? Um, and so like we don't need to know his backstory. And when they did the prequels, and he's like little Anakin, and then he's big Anakin, and then he turns evil. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's Darth Vader, I guess. Cool. I just think, like, he was much cooler when you didn't know anything about his past, really. He was just like this scary dude, great villain, and whatever. So in this case, does the Kingsman need a? I don't know why they went this route necessarily, this prequel route. And in fact, it seems like they're gonna like go from this movie to, like, they're gonna have like they're kind of rebooting the series, I guess, in a lot of ways, like going back to the beginning and then like doing some stuff from there. Um, and I don't really know why they're going that route. I don't know if maybe the Kingsman movies, maybe they weren't really successful. I don't know. Like, I don't know why they didn't just make like a third Kingsman movie instead of like, oh, we're gonna like go back to the beginning and start from there, you know. So, but this is, but but if you're a fan of the Kingsman, I don't think, or if you're not a fan of the Kingsman for that matter, this movie like stands on its own. Like you don't need to know anything about the Kingsman franchise. There aren't any callbacks really to the franchise, um, other than at the very end of the movie, and this isn't a spoiler, but at the very end of the movie, they're like, and now we shall establish this new secret society called the Kingsmen. This new secret agency called the Kingsmen or whatever, and here, whatever, right? And that's kind of how it ends. So it's like, okay, other than that though, like the whole story really has nothing to do with the Kingsman franchise. So I think that's kind of cool. So if you, it makes it accessible, I guess. So if you haven't seen the Kingsman franchise, you might like this. I don't think it's especially Kingsman-y either. So if you're going into it as a Kingsman fan, thinking, oh, this is going to be all Kingsman-like, it's somewhat different to the whole Kingsman, um, to the other Kingsman movies, in my opinion. It does have the same director, and there are some similar things that it uses. A lot of like slow motion and fast frames, and it like slows down and then speeds up, and then and stuff like that. So it's a lot of the same techniques and things. So you'll recognize those elements, but basically this is its own story, and it's really cool. It's very historical. So it's set it's set prior to World War One, and then World War One starts, and they go through the whole war kind of, and then it ends at the end of this movie. So you kind of see all of World War One. Well, I mean the World War is kind of the backdrop. Like you see some events from the war, but nothing like really. But a lot of historical events and historical figures, and so for that reason, I'm glad I took my dad with me, because he's a big history buff, and he was able to be like, oh yeah, that's historical and that's historical and things, which was helpful to me. I like to know like when things are set in a historical context. I like to know like but they're fictional. I like to know like what's actually historical and where it deviates, where the story deviates. So that was helpful to have someone who knows their history. And if you want to brush up on World War One history yourself before you see the movie, that might help too. Um, but um, but to give you an example or a contrast, I guess, when I watched what was it, the Lovecraft Country. I watched like a few episodes of Lovecraft Country and frigging hated it. Oh, it was so bad. But so but in Lovecraft Country, it's set in this historical setting, and like I didn't know. I was like, was all this stuff really happening to blacks back then? And like, was it really like that? I don't know how accurate that was, and it bugged me because I'm like, okay, because I know the creators of the show have like a certain viewpoint, and they're trying to get that viewpoint across to you, and I don't know like how much they deviated from actual history to like make their point. Anyway, so the Kingsman's very historical, and if you wanna know like anyway, if you wanna it's helpful to know your history when you see this movie. And it made it cooler too, because my dad was like, "Oh yeah, that happened and this happened and whatever." Like, okay, cool. As far as the performances, they're great. The performances are amazing by the entire cast. Um, the villain the villain you kind of like the villain's unmasked at the end, and he's a little over the top, and I think it was meant to be that way. The whole so the beginning of the show, it started out very, very slow for me. The first and second acts, I was just kind of like, okay, like it's not really doing it for me. It was very Downton Abbey, right? It was very like very British and very like very understated, I guess I would say. Um, but then the third act like won me over. The third act was just like, oh my gosh, this is awesome now, and it just like made the whole movie great. So I really did enjoy this movie, and just know that though, like if you're in the first and second act and you're like, okay, can we move on, please? Just know that the third act is friggin' amazing. Um, so yeah, so enjoy that. But don't go in with like super high expectations for the third act either, because then you're gonna be let down. But that the third act is really what made it for me. Um, and like I said, the villain's a little over the top, a little crazy, and I didn't even really understand the villain's motivations. And like I said, this show is very British. It's a very British-centric point of view. So I think some of that doesn't really translate, especially with the villain at the end. Like, I didn't really understand his motivations necessarily, and I kind of understood. I think a British audience would really find it like pretty absurdly funny, because I think it's supposed to be that way. But I'm not sure that translates to an American audience in my case, or maybe to another different point of view than like a British point of view. So keep that in mind. But basically, there's just like there's this big cabal, right? That's behind all the. It's basically explains World War One from like there's this cabal behind the scenes, like pulling all the strings and whatever. But it has the actual events that happened in the war, leading up to the war, and everything that happened in the war. But it just kind of gives another explanation for how those things came to be. But yeah, Ralph Fiennes is amazing. Of course, he's a great actor, does a great job, and the supporting cast is really good. And there are some good twists in this show that I wasn't expecting at all. So those were kind of cool. In the second act, really, like there were some really cool things that happen. You're just like, oh wow, okay, that's interesting. And it sets up the third act really well. Um, but yeah, it was a great action adventure kind of show. It really reminded me of like older shows, like from the like like John Wayne, westerns, or like war shows, like The Dirty Dozen and that kind of thing, like from that era. Older shows. It's got that kind of feeling to it, and I liked that. I thought that was kind of cool. It's kind of refreshing. It's not trying to be like, it's not trying to be hip or cool necessarily, but it is hip and cool because it's like just classic and stuff like that. And I guess, but like I said, the first and second acts drug a little bit, and I was thinking at the time, I was like, well, maybe I'm just like too much, like I'm like a comic book guy, right? I'm like totally into like Marvel movies and DC movies and stuff, so maybe I'm like a superhero freak, and it was just a little too tame for me. But like I said, the third act was really great and made up for that. So Um, I didn't think it was. I wouldn't. I don't. I don't know why it was rated R. It could have easily been PG-13. Um, they just there were like I don't know. There were a few F words in it. I always wonder. I always wonder about the F word. I'm like, cause like in Braveheart they said the F word, and like now this is like a World War One movie, and they say the F word, and I'm like, did people really use the F word? Like how far back does that go? I don't feel like that word like is. I feel like it's more of a contemporary word, and I'm like, did people? I'm not sure people really used that back in 1905 or whatever. Whenever this thing is, or back in medieval times or whatever, right? So I always wonder about that. But so I mean, there were like a few. There were a few F words. The violence was, the violence was fairly tame, especially compared to the other, Kingsman movies. In this, you know, the violence was pretty tame. I mean, there's blood, there's blood and things here and there. Um, and so it's a pretty tame R. If that is of interest to you. Um, And yeah, I really liked it though. And like I said, this sets up a sequel, so I guess they're gonna like be, I think it looks like the sequel is gonna be in World War II. There is an end credits scene that sets up the sequel, so make sure you wait for that. And other than that, that's The King's Man, and so yeah, go check it out. I am the Notorious B.I.V, and I I think this was a great movie. Go see it. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And I will see you all in the next video, baby. Yeah, yeah.